just for my own correction. So, welcome. My name is Maria Levine. I am your host and also the host of the meetup, Improve Your Relationships and Make Friends NYC. So, for those of you in the New York area and would like to come to one of our in-person meetups, you're more than welcome to come. I know you're Veronica, you're saying you're in New York. So, we host those every other Friday. And that's an opportunity for you to come and make a friend, learn a relationship skill. Those, they're usually a little bit more personalized to what you have going on in your life. And I will get really specific on helping you overcome whatever that obstacle is for you. And then at the end of that, you get to connect with the people there, get to know them better, and hopefully, ideally, make a friend. So the next one is going to be next Friday. So you're welcome to join us for that if you're here. But other than that, this webinar is going to be about resolving conflict, specifically relationship conflict. But of course, this can be applied to any relationship you have, not just your romantic one. But I am going to be focusing more on that aspect of it. So a little bit about me. My name, like I said, is Maria Levine. I am a relationship coach who helps women create amazing romantic relationships with their partners through self-confidence and self-esteem. And so this is one of the very crucial steps in order to create amazing relationships. It's knowing how to overcome conflict, how to resolve it, and how to create strength from that conflict. So that's what I'm here to teach you. This is one of those crucial steps in my process, and I'm happy to have you. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Like I said, if you have any questions throughout, don't hesitate to put it in the chat. I'm also going to have a portion at the end where I will answer questions or address how this is specifically can be applied to your situation. And I'll make sure to make time for that towards the end. Okay, but if at any point you have any questions, something isn't clear, you would like me to stop and either explain better or repeat anything, just let me know and write that in the chat. So, oh, where did I go? 1 second. There we go. All right, so this is how to resolve conflict, like I said. Oh, and we'll probably have people trickling in, so we're gonna let them do that. So before we get into how to resolve conflict, I really think it's important for us to understand the idea that we want conflict. So conflict is not something that needs to be avoided. On the contrary, if we don't have a relationship with conflict in it, usually what happens is that our needs, what is important to us, isn't being met. It's not being addressed, and it's all being pushed under the rug. And eventually what happens is that we end up kind of exploding. It ends up coming back up in unpleasant ways. So we want to be able to have conflict when it comes up. We don't, however, want to have chronic conflict or conflict that is not being resolved, right? So it's like if you're having conflict that is just going in circles or bickering that just never ends, that is also a sign that something is off and something needs to be addressed. The ideal is somewhere in the middle, right? Where we have some conflict and it's being addressed and it's being talked about. And you feel like at the end of that conflict, your relationship is stronger, it's more connected, it's healthier because of the conflict. That is the ideal. So we want to make sure that we are having authentic conversations with our partners and that we are willing to disagree with them, that we are willing to come up with things that contradict what they want because that is what is true for us, right? And so if it's not so much the fact that we're having conflict, it's all about how we're having that conflict. So we want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that creates resolution. Now, healthy conflict only has two things in my idea, and it's to keep things simple. So you only need understanding and resolution. That's it. That is the goal of conflict. And I really highlight in this webinar the understanding piece of it. We have to be willing to understand. And when we can come to our partner from a place of understanding, you're going to be surprised how often a resolution kind of finds us instead of having to go and find it. So that is the goal. And that is what I want you to kind of come into this understanding about conflict, that we need it, it's necessary, we want it, but we want to focus on having productive, healthy conflict. All right, that is the goal. The first step to having that is this idea that we have to be willing to be uncomfortable. So if you are adverse to conflict, if you tend to avoid it, then what happens in your relationship is that you create resentment, you create bitterness because you're not bringing up things that are important to you. You're not speaking up for what you want. And so your needs are going unmet. That means that you have this like sense of somebody is being unjust to you, even though in reality, you're the one who's being unjust to you by not speaking up for what you want. But what happens is we put that on our partner, and then we create distance and separateness, and then that eventually leads to the relationship either ending or to a relationship that's very toxic or unhealthy. The other thing that can happen is that we people please. So when we don't address what we want, we don't speak up for what we want, we end up giving up a lot for our partner or for avoiding the conflict, right? We don't want to have the conflict, so I'm just going to give you what you want so I don't have to have this conversation, have this argument. So because of that, eventually what's going to happen in our relationship is we're going to feel unheard. We're going to quiet ourselves. We're not going to show up the way we want to as our authentic selves. And then we're not going to love that relationship. We're going to blame the relationship for that. And then eventually we will probably end up leaving it. So it is important for us to develop the skill of overcoming conflict, and we must be willing to be uncomfortable through that. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like. But first, I want to address what happens when conflict comes up for people who have experienced some kind of trauma in their past. And maybe it's not trauma, maybe it's just like you have a memory or you have like unease around conflict. Whatever that is for you, you want to understand what's happening to you biologically when conflict comes up. If you have a hard time having those difficult conversations, if you find yourself adverse to conflict, it's probably because you're having a strong reaction to the conflict. And what ends up happening is you either have a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response that kicks in involuntarily. And that response is going to stop you from having the conversation and eventually creating the amazing relationship that you want to be creating. Okay. And so when that happens, what you want to do is know. You want to know that that's happening for you, and you want to bring awareness to it. So before I get into what happens when we bring awareness to it, I want to address each of those individually. So most of you have probably heard of fight and flight, right? It's pretty common. But there's also this freeze and fawn aspect of it that comes up that can come up for us. So you want to know where you are on this spectrum. So is your reaction to fight? Like, do you want to react to your partner and yell and scream and attack mode? Are you tempted to flee, to flight, to run away, to avoid, to just leave the room and just not have the argument or the conversation? Are you tempted to do you freeze? Do you shut down? Are you kind of like in a state of shock where you don't want to be having this, so you can't speak up, you can't show up? Or do you fawn? And fawn is speaking to this people pleasing that I spoke about earlier, where when we fawn, we give up. We just give them what they want, and we don't show up for what we actually in reality want. We just say, yes, honey, yes, you can have that. Yes, that's fine. And that will end the argument, that will end the conflict, but ultimately it won't create the relationship that we want. A relationship where we're showing up as our authentic selves, when we're showing up for what we want, and we're creating a relationship that we're happy in, right? And so we have to be willing, like I said at the beginning, to disagree. We have to be willing to say to our partner, you know what, that's not how I feel. This is actually how I feel. But we can't do that if our bodies won't let us, if we're having this biological reaction that is telling us that we're in danger, or that's telling us that this is wrong and that we shouldn't be having this conflict. Okay, so we have to overcome this so that we can feel comfortable and safe having this conflict. Now, this is for those of you that might be adverse to conflict. Not everybody is. Some of you are like, I got it. I don't need it. I'm ready to have the fights. I just want to know how to have them better. That's fair. And I will get into that. But I did want to address this first in case there are some of you out there that are a little bit more like, I just don't know how to have the arguments, or I find myself avoiding it or quieting myself because I'm afraid to show up as who I want to show up. Okay, so we have to understand why this is happening and that it's perfectly reasonable and rational for your brain to want to keep you safe. Okay, it is almost involuntary, this irrational response that happens when conflict comes up and we want to flight, fight, freeze, or fawn. So what you want to do is you want to be aware of it. So you want to know first and foremost where you fall in these 4 categories. So do you freeze? Are you more tempted to run away? Like, where do you fall in this spectrum? What is your tendency? You want to be aware of that. And you want to know when that situation comes up, how does it feel? Like, what does my body want to do physically? And I really love the practice of journaling. Of course, it is really helpful, not just so that you can bring awareness to a situation, but that you can really process what's happening. Because when you write things down, you're doing 2 things. You're thinking it and you're also like writing it. So you're processing it as you write as well. So I encourage everybody, if you have an aversion to fighting and conflict, to sit down and write, how do I experience conflict when it comes up? What does my body want to do? What thoughts am I having? So that you can have that awareness so you know. We can't change anything until we know what the problem is. So you want to get really specific to what the issue is for you. And then once we know what the awareness, like once we have the awareness, we want to start to self-soothe. So self-soothing is something that I'm going to teach in the next slide. I just wanted to touch on it now so that you know that when you master the skill of soothing your nervous system, calming yourself down, getting out of that irrational fight, flight, freeze, fawn mode and into like the rational, I know what I need to do, I know how I want to show up place, when you can shift from that to that, that is half the work. That is everything. So you want to make sure that you practice that skill, which I'm going to show you, so that you can really be the master of how you show up in your relationship. And that might require, especially at the beginning, for you to step away. So you might have to say to your partner, hey, this is maybe triggering me. Maybe this is too uncomfortable for me. I need to step away and really soothe myself. And then I can come back and have the conversation, right? It's not about avoiding the conversation. We want to have it. We want to be able to confront what is important to our relationship, but we want to do it from a place where we feel safe and brave and willing, right? This requires knowing why we're doing this. We don't want to be uncomfortable for the sake of being uncomfortable, right? We want to be uncomfortable for something bigger. So the reason to be uncomfortable, the reason to have this conflict is because at the end of it, your relationship is stronger. Your connection with your partner is better. You have more skills to overcome the next arguments, right? Every single time that you have a confrontation, you get better at them. And then over time, you're going to be a conflict resolution pro. But you have to be willing to do this uncomfortable step first, especially at the beginning, if this is something that's difficult for you, so that your brain understands that it is not dangerous, that you will live and survive, and that it's worth doing. Right? So you have to remind yourself why it matters that you show up for your relationship and have the uncomfortable conversations. And then lastly, you have to be willing to be uncomfortable, right? That's the whole point of this. You have to know that to some degree, the discomfort will just never fully go away. It's always going to be there, but it's worth experiencing because of what you get out of it, because of what comes at the end of it. Okay. Now, I want to speak to this a little bit more. So there is a level of discomfort that you can be willing to feel. Okay. So there's your comfort zone. It's in the middle. And then right outside of it is your discomfort zone, right? I'm sure we've all heard of this idea. You want to be outside of your discomfort zone, outside of your comfort zone, but not so outside of it that you're petrified and that you won't do anything. right? You don't want to push yourself too far into discomfort that you bounce back into your comfort zone, because that can happen. So you have to be careful with how much discomfort you push yourself to feel. You want to balance the right amount, just enough to grow, but not too much that you go back into hiding. And only you can know how much that is for you. But when you're willing to find out, when you're open to the experience that this is going to be uncomfortable and that's okay, then you will progress. You will push yourself. And then you just have to trust yourself to know, okay, this is too uncomfortable for me now. I have to pull back a little, or I can't say that just yet. I'm building up to that. Okay. So wherever you are, have grace, have patience, and just be willing to face the difficulty because of what comes after. And for those of you who just joined, welcome. I did say at the beginning that if you have any questions for me, if you want to interact with me, you can feel free to do that in the chat. Just write down any questions, any comments. If you need me to repeat something, if you need me to go back, if you need me to clarify, feel free to do that. I want to make sure that you guys are getting information that you need and that it's clear and concise. Okay, so, and then at the end, I will have a segment where you can ask me questions and come on. So you can also hold your questions to the end. Just want to make sure I said that for those of you who just joined. So I did talk about self-soothing in the last slide, and I want to talk a little bit about this more, because during this webinar, I am going to be teaching you 2 important skills, and this is one of them. And what I want to say is that if some of these concepts that I'm teaching if they're new to you, I would encourage you to try them on. I'm not saying that you have to use them in your life for now, never, obviously, right? That's your choice. But I would love for you to be open to trying them and seeing if they are something worth doing and worth taking on, especially if they're new, especially if this is something that you haven't heard before. See if it fits for you. Like, try it on like a sweater, and maybe it can make an impact in your life. And maybe you decide, you know what, this isn't for me. That's 100% fine as well. But just be willing to try it on and see if it works for you. So the first skill that I want to teach is this ability to soothe ourselves, is the ability to process strong negative emotions. Okay, it's going to come a long way for your relationship if you can sit with your uncomfortable emotions without reacting from them. Okay, so we're going to, I'm going to give you an example so that this is more easier to understand. So let's say I'm having a conversation with my boyfriend and he tells me that I don't clean enough. I'm not helping enough around the house. Okay, so he says this to me, and I have a thought like, that's so unfair that he thinks that. That's so unfair of him to say that to me. Like, what about all of these other things that I do, right? That's going to be my reaction in that moment. And because I have that reaction, that is so unfair, then I'm going to feel hurt in that moment. I'm going to feel pain. I'm going to feel maybe guilt, maybe frustration. All of these things are going to come up for me. Because I feel this hurt, I'm going to act in a way that is distant. Maybe it's angry, maybe it's bitter. I'm going to respond to him in a way that hurt is being heard, it's being reacted from. Okay. And if I react from this place of hurt, then that is going to escalate my conflict, and it's going to create the cycle where now he says something defensive and then I say something defensive, and we're going back and forth because we're talking to each other from a painful place. Now, if we pause before we react from the hurt and we allow ourselves to feel the pain of the conversation in the moment, okay, and we let it exist in our bodies without reacting to it, what happens is it lessens. It goes away, like it lightens in intensity. And when that hurt lightens, we are in a better position to respond instead of reacting from the hurt, right? Once the hurt is kind of lightened up, I can actually access my rational mind and say, okay, now how do I want to respond to the fact that he thinks this? Do I want to still get angry, or do I actually want to ask more questions? Do I actually want to maybe tell him why? I have so many more options when I'm not reacting from that initial pain. But in order for us to be able to get to that place, we have to know how to process that pain. So if you are new to this idea and you don't really know how to do this, at first, you might not be able to in the moment. At first, you might have to wait until the moment has passed, once you've already had the argument, to process the hurt. And then you can come back from that rational place. But the more you practice it, the better you're going to get at it, and the easier it's going to be for you to do it in the moment. And it's actually pretty cool once you get really good at it, of like you can actually stop your emotions mid like argument and kind of relax into them. And then you find that your conversations veer into a calmer, rational space. So let me go through exactly how that looks. So first, you're going to recognize the emotion. So you're in the middle of this conversation, or it's after the conversation has happened, and you recognize that you feel hurt. Now, the more specific you can get with the emotion, the better, the clearer it just becomes. So if it's actually guilt that I'm feeling, and you can recognize that, then you could say, I am feeling guilt. If you don't really know, if you just know that you feel hurt or bad, you can also just say, I feel bad. Okay, you just want to say that to yourself so that you can acknowledge the emotion. Now you're going to breathe and allow the emotion to exist. So literally, you're going to go, you are allowed to be here. The reason this is important is because so often when we feel strong negative emotions, our desire is to push them away. Our desire is to avoid them and to just like ignore them, go on Netflix, go on our phones, eat a sandwich, anything but feel the feeling. Okay. Or our instinct is to react from the emotion. Like I said earlier, if we feel hurt, we want to yell, we want to accuse, we want to defend, right? These are all the things that we do from this feeling. So instead, we have this option of allowing and processing. And this is where we become powerful. So we want to say to the emotion, you are allowed to exist. I am present with the emotion. Okay. And then you're going to bring your attention into your body. So this is kind of like a short meditation, and it is really, really, it can be very short. It doesn't have to be 10 minutes. It can be literally 30 seconds, 60 seconds. You're going to breathe, allow it to exist, and then find it. Every emotion has a physical vibration that we can experience. So you might say to yourself, okay, my hurt is in my chest. It's in my shoulders. It's in my head, wherever you find it. And then you're going to bring attention and awareness to it, and you're going to describe it. So you're going to say, my hurt is in my chest and it feels tight. It feels hot. It feels tense. It feels heavy. Whatever it is for you, however you experience it, we're all going to experience it differently. So just get really specific with the emotion, be with it, describe it. If it has a color, if it has a texture, all of the stuff that whatever it is that you're experiencing, you want to bring it into awareness. So be with it, allow it to exist. Is it vibrating? Right? Is it moving? Notice that when you pay attention to it, when you start to pay attention, it'll change. It'll start to shift if you're actually being very aware. And then once you're allowing it, what ends up happening is most of the time it will lighten. It will loosen its intensity, its grip on you. It will let go of you. And when you notice this happening, that is when you can start to kind of come out of this processing. Once you notice that it's getting lighter and it's allowing, and you're actually allowing it to be there, you can just tell yourself, this is just a feeling and I am safe, right? Right. Sometimes we feel like if we feel a certain way, we're not safe. There's something that's wrong. But a vibration in our body is just a vibration. Nothing's going to go wrong if you allow it to exist. So when we get really good at this process, we can stop being at the mercy of our feelings in the moment. And then from that place, we can decide, okay, now what do I want to do? Now, how do I want to show up? Now, it might be that you still want to say the same things. You still want to say whatever you were going to say, but your attitude could be different. The way you're going to say them can change, right? Your tone might shift. you might be able to say it a little calmer, a little more rationally. So the idea is to not let the emotion control you, but to be in charge of how you show up for your argument or for your conflict. This is also huge if you're averse to conflict in general and you want to get yourself to a place where you even have the argument. So this works when you're in the argument, this works before the argument, and it works after. So if you're in the before place and you feel fear, you can use this process to allow the fear to exist, to let it loosen in its intensity, and then to take the action that you actually want to take, which in this case is have the conversation. Is that clear? Now, I want to talk about boundaries because I think it's super important for us to know exactly what kind of arguments we want to be having, right? And before I get more into this, I feel the need to address something really important. So, for those of you who feel like they're not sure if their relationship is 100% healthy or even worth staying in, I want you to take inventory of your relationship briefly and make sure that you're in a relationship that you actually want to be in, right? So there are unhealthy relationships, toxic relationships that are honestly just not worth saving. They're not worth doing the work to make them better because they're too toxic, they're too unhealthy. And those relationships are going to be relationships that have controlling behavior. Okay, so if your partner is telling you what to do, if they're controlling like what you dress and where you go, right, that is very unhealthy and can be dangerous. If your partner is giving you contempt, if they are disrespectful in any way, not in any way, but if they put you down or if they curse at you, if they degrade you, right? You don't want to be in that dynamic. If they lie to you, if they're constantly saying they're going to do something and not doing it, or telling you that they're somewhere where they're not, if they're isolating you, if you are no longer in contact with your friends and your family, not just because you lost touch, but because you are in a situation where you have been completely like your partner has completely separated you from that community. And if you feel like you're walking on eggshells. So if you don't feel safe to talk to your partner, if you're scared that they're going to explode, if you're not sure if you can even bring up things to your partner, right? If this is and this is an extreme, of course, but if you are on the spectrum of unhealthy relationships, I never recommend that you try to fix it with conflict resolution. I think that these are relationships that just need to be let go of, and that you need to take time to really work on your connection with you and being there for yourself. Okay, so if you are in a healthy relationship, then you're going to have some aspects of these things over here on the left. So there's going to be respect, there's going to be trust, there's going to be honesty. You're going to have a sense of separateness where you are your own person outside of the relationship. There's going to be playfulness and laughter and jokes. You're going to be able to resolve your conflict to some degree, right? There's already a baseline that can always be improved, but there's one there. And you can feel like you're comfortable communicating with your partner to some degree. Now, this is a bit of a scale, so it's going to come up and down depending on where you are in your relationship, but there has to be a strong foundation of most of that already before you can really build on that and create that epic romance that you want, right? So just take a little inventory, make sure that you're not trying to make a relationship that is incredibly unhealthy and fixing it with conflict resolution, because that is going to be more about changing your partner, right? If you're with someone who's narcissistic or sociopathic in some way, you're not going to be able to change them as people. That's just not what we can do. So all you can really do is focus on what you can do, which is working on your thoughts and your feelings, and that's what we're here. So just want to make sure that that's a little caveat before I continue. So let's talk about boundaries. Boundaries are basically just rules that you create for the interactions that you want to have with people. So boundaries are decided, boundaries dictate what you do, right? They don't dictate what other people do, and they don't try to control other people's behavior. So it's important for us to have boundaries, especially around conflict, so that we know what we will and won't put up with. So we know what we're willing to interact with, to allow, and what we won't. So for me, I do not like to be yelled at. I just won't have it. If I'm in a situation where someone starts to raise their voice, I stop them. I say, I don't want to interact with you when you're yelling, and I leave. And that is what I do, right? I decide what I do. I remove myself from the situation. I don't say to them, stop yelling. Don't yell at me. I can, but I'm going to allow them to yell if they want to and just decide what I do. So I get to leave. I don't expect them. I'm not threatening them. I'm not saying, hey, if you don't stop yelling, I'm going to leave. That's more of a threat. I'm telling them, hey, I won't interact with you when you are yelling, so I'm going to leave. I know it feels like it's a very small distinction, but it's an important one, because when we start to use boundaries to try to control people, then we're going to be stuck in a game of manipulation. So you have to really look at boundaries as only what you will do. At the end of the day, people are going to act however they want. We don't get to dictate that. All we get to dictate is how we show up and what we do. So decide for yourself what kind of relationship, what kind of boundaries you want to have around conflict. Now, everybody's boundaries will look different, right? I have a friend who does not mind yelling whatsoever. In fact, she likes it because it shows her that her partner is passionate and is present and finds what they're talking about important enough to raise their voice. That's how she sees it, and she feels perfectly safe in that environment, and that works for her. So for her boundary might not be yelling, okay? Everybody has a different one. Another common one is cursing, right? Maybe you don't want to be cursed at. Maybe if somebody curses at you or calls you a name, you leave the situation, you remove yourself. Whatever that is, you want to make sure that you are clear, right? You don't want to find yourself in a situation where somebody crosses a boundary and you don't know what to do and you don't know if this is right for you. So give it a thought before you try to resolve the conflict. Is just know for yourself what you will and won't put up with. Okay. And what you're going to do when that situation arises. Like, are you going to get out of the car if you're in a car and call an Uber and leave and go home? Like, are you willing to do that extreme? If you say, like, this is a boundary for me, I won't allow it. You have to be willing to follow through and commit to what you say you're going to do. Okay. So these are things that are created from love. We create boundaries for love for ourselves and for love for other people. We don't do this angrily or bitterly. We don't do this out of spite or enrage. Okay. We can create boundaries very calmly from a place of understanding and compassion. I understand that you want to do X, but I don't want that. So I'm going to do Y. Right? Very simple, very clear, very loving. You can continue to do X, but not around me. I'm going to leave. So that this way, when you have clear boundaries, you know that you're going to be in a safe situation when you argue. You're not going to be like in fear that they're going to do something that you're not going to like, because you have decided that you're just not going to allow it. You're just not going to put up with it. And you know what you're going to do. You have a plan of action. And that creates clarity, and ideally that makes you feel safer around conflict if that is an issue for you at the beginning. So just know that for yourself. Yeah, and I think the example here is I don't want to be in the car when someone is smoking, right? That's another one. That's not very much about conflict. It's just an example of how boundaries can look. So if somebody smokes in the car, like, I will ask them to stop. If they do not, I will no longer get in cars with them. Right? That's just what you will do. That's how you set that up for you. This is how we show up responsible for ourselves and what we want. All right, so now let's get a little bit more into what conflict looks like and how to actually resolve it. So what I was talking about before were kind of like the issues surrounding conflict. Now let's get into like the nitty-gritty. So the goal of conflict from my perspective, is that we listen without defensiveness. Okay. The goal is to understand your partner's perspective. Understanding to me is more important than resolving the conflict, than proving that you're right, than avoiding the conflict altogether. The goal of conflict should be to understand. The way that we do this, like I said, is to listen without defensiveness. Okay, so when we have a conflict, our instinct immediately is going to be to defend ourselves. Okay, we feel we are being attacked, and it is rational to want to defend. Okay, that is what's going to happen. That's going to happen to all of us at any time that there's conflict. Now, what we can do as intelligent human beings is understand that that's a reaction that we're going to have, listen to the defensiveness, understand, like, feel the urge to be defensiveness, and not react from that place. Just like I was talking earlier with the processing your feelings, you can interrupt the feeling by allowing it to exist, understanding that it's there, and deciding instead what you're going to do. So going back to the example of my boyfriend telling me that I don't do enough around the house, I have the thought it's unfair. And I have a bunch of other thoughts as well, like, well, I do this and I do that, and what about this and what about that? All of those thoughts are defensiveness trying to speak. Now, if I were to tell him all of that in that moment, immediately he would respond with a rebuttal, and then I would respond with a rebuttal. And now we're in a conflict cycle, right? Nothing is getting resolved. Nobody is understanding what's actually happening. We're just on the defensive. The key is to put down your defenses when you feel them. This is the skill number 2 that's going to really impact your ability to resolve conflict. When you feel the need to be defensive, recognize that need. Notice it and notice what it wants to say, right? You're not ignoring the need. You're not pretending it's not there. It's still going to come up. You want to acknowledge it. And then what you're going to do is you're going to listen to your partner instead. You're going to get curious and open with them and their experience in that moment. This doesn't mean that you're not eventually going to tell them what's important for you, and you're not going to eventually tell them what you were thinking earlier. But before you do that, before you defend and tell them your side of things, you need to listen to what they're saying and understand them fully. It's not until we understand them and they feel understood that we can then say our part, right? So let's walk through the example. So I feel the defensiveness. I feel the need to say, this is unfair. What about all of these things that I do? I interrupt that, and instead I ask a question. I become curious. I go, why do you think that? What is going on? What are you experiencing that I'm not seeing? That opens up and allows them to tell me more. So then they're going to tell me all of their reasons and all of their experience. And I'm not going to take it personally in that moment. This isn't about me in that moment. This is about them and hearing them and what they have to say. Now, your desire to defend will be there. It's going to say, but you have to speak up. You have to tell them about all the times you cleaned that one, it's going to be there. It's going to show up. You're going to recognize it, and you're not going to let it voice. You're not going to let it talk. You're going to listen to your partner and repeat what they say. So once you think you understand everything that's going on for them, you're going to say it back to them. You can say it back to them in their same words, or you can say it back to them in your own words, whatever feels comfortable for you. And you have to make sure that they agree. Confirm that that you understand them. They have to make sure that, they have to feel heard by you. And the way that they feel heard by you is if they say, yes, that is exactly what I'm experiencing, you got it right. Okay? So they say something, you ask questions, you try to understand it more, and then you repeat it to them, and then they say yes, right? That is first and foremost. That is how we come to understand. That is how we drop our defenses, and that is how we eventually reach resolution. But we have to get to this point first in order to get to the next point where now you can say, okay, now that I understand you, now that I see your point, can I tell you my point of view? Okay, this is what I think I've been doing. This is why I've been showing up the way I've been showing up. And now it's your turn to talk once they're fully understood, right? Now, this can work if you're the one presenting the issue. Same thing. You present them the issue, and then they're going to get defensive, right? That's what they're going to do. Expect it, know that it's coming. Your job is to listen to them as they become defensive. Your job is to hear them and repeat what they're saying to them in their defense of what you've brought up. Again, once they feel understood and heard, then you can continue with what your point is. Okay. But you want to make sure that your partner is being heard by you and that they know that they're being heard by you. Then you can continue on with your side of things and resolution can happen from that space. Right? This is a skill that we practice, and the skill is to drop our defenses, to listen to our desire to be defensive and to not act from it. It's the same skill of processing the emotions, but it's a little bit more specific to the situation of conflict. Okay, it will take practice. It will not be easy at first. You might slip, you might ignore it altogether the first few times, but the more you practice, the more you try, the better you're going to get, and the better your conflicts are going to get as well, and the easier it's going to be for you to resolve them over time. Okay, so I want to talk about now the difference between a perpetual problem versus a solvable problem. Every relationship is going to have both, okay? Don't expect all of your problems to always resolve. There are some problems that are going to last the course of your relationship. Now, this is why it's so important for the goal to your conflict to be understanding, because once you understand the problem, you will find it so much easier to find solutions. They come up so much more naturally. It's almost like the next obvious conclusion. And oftentimes, the reason why we can't resolve conflict is because we don't understand it. We don't know what's going on for each person. We haven't been communicating that well enough. And so the reason why we have perpetual problems is because we are not meeting an emotional need. Okay. And this need is often one of trust, validation, or safety. So this is a very core need that is continuously not being met and therefore continues to come up. Solvable problems are obvious, right? They're usually solved by a compromise or by a planning issue or by just communicating a little better. These problems will come and go all of the time, the solvable ones. It's the perpetual ones that we really need to reframe, and we don't need to see them as like there's something wrong in my relationship because I can't fix this problem. It's perfectly normal for a problem to come up again and again because it shows you that you are two different people with two different points of view that are coming together to try to build a life. So it's usually a profound difference that makes it so that it continues to come up because neither of you are willing or maybe even able to negotiate it, to let go of it, to compromise on it. And that's okay. The goal isn't to fix the problem. The goal is to understand each other more every time it comes up. So every time it comes up, you come to say, oh, this is why he thinks this way or they think that way. And this is why I think this way. And so this is an opportunity for us to understand each other, become closer, and become more compassionate towards the other person for how they're experiencing this. Okay? It's not a problem if it doesn't get resolved. It's more of a problem if it doesn't get understood. So that's why your goal is to make sure you are understanding. Now, last thing I want to talk about is this idea of allowing influence. So in a partnership, we must be willing to honor and respect the person we love. We need to find ways to agree with them. Sorry. So this is a little bit like compromise, except that it is more about letting the person you love change you and allowing for you to change the person you love just a little bit. All right. Now, you don't want to change so much that you lose yourself and that you lose your authenticity and that you're not showing up how you want. But you don't want to be so stubborn that you don't change at all, that you're not willing to negotiate, that you're not being flexible. Okay, there is a middle ground. There is an in between, and we want to try to find it. Now, the way that we find that is whenever you are considering changing something for your partner, you have to check internally, do I want to head in this direction? Is this something that is okay with me? Right? You have to have your own permission before you change, before you allow influence. And if you allow the influence, then you recognize that you're headed in a direction that might bring you closer to your partner. And it has to feel like it's not betraying you. And you know that because of how you feel when you decide to head in that direction. You can always trust your instincts. You can always trust your emotions to tell you whether or not you're betraying yourself, you're giving away too much, or you can continue to give and you feel fine with that. So always check in when you are compromising, when you are changing for your relationship, that it is a change, it is a direction that you want to be headed in. All right. It's not a problem for us to change for our relationship as long as we have our own permission, as long as we're doing it consciously and on purpose and not against ourselves. All right. Relationships require us to change. How much is up to you, and you get to decide that for yourself and your relationship. So, last few things before we wrap up. Relationships that resolve conflict are anti-fragile. I love this idea of anti-fragility. It's this concept that every time something breaks, when it comes together, we get stronger. So adversity leads to growth, okay? It is okay to have conflict. You want to have healthy conflicts because at the other side of it, you get so much more intimacy, connection, and love if you are able to overcome it. Having conflict is not a problem. We want them, like I said. Emotions often lead to unnecessary escalation. That is why it's important for us to process our emotions without reacting so that we can stop the cycle. And then remember to change the goal from getting rid of the conflict or being right to understanding the issue. That is first and foremost, that is crucial. So that is my time. I wanted to make sure that I allowed for us to have a conversation, answer any questions. If you guys have anything that you weren't clear on, anything that you need more guidance on, please feel free to either raise your hand or put it in the chat. I would love to address those one-on-one. While you guys are doing that, if that comes up for you, I want to tell you about me and my program and how this is something that I integrate into my coaching with my clients. So for those of you who missed it, I am a relationship coach. I help women in romantic relationships reignite their romance in 90 days. So I have a program where I take you through conflict resolution. I teach it to you specifically for your situation. I also help you with your self-esteem, your self-love. We uncover your expectations that you have for your relationships. We learn how to meet them without changing your partner. My philosophy revolves around the idea that it only takes one person to create an amazing romance. And so I teach you how to be that one person. And so in 90 days, by the end of those 90 days, you will have a relationship that is so much more of what you want, that can resolve conflict, that is intimate, that is passionate once more, especially for those that have lost that. Yeah, so Simone wants me to talk a little bit more about, put the chart about anti-fragility back up. I don't think I had a chart for anti-fragility. I just kind of, or you mean the part? Here, let me go back. Oh, it was this one. Sorry. This one? This is where I talk about
Yeah,
this.
that's it. Thank you.
Okay.
There were some great notes there that I wanted to take down. This has been so helpful, by the way. Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm so happy. I'm so glad. And that's exactly what I wanted to do, is I want to make sure that everybody has access to this information, because I know that I would have loved for somebody to sit me down and tell me this stuff when I was, before I knew it. So I'm so happy that I can share with you. And the last thing I want to say, if you guys don't have any more questions, is I am inviting every single person on this webinar on a call with me. So every single person gets a free call for 1 hour where we can sit down and address your specific situation, your specific relationship needs, and what it is that you need to overcome your specific obstacles to get that relationship that you want, to reignite the romance, to have the passion, to have the conflict resolution, all of the things. So I'm going to put a link to that down here in the chat. I will also probably reach out to you on your messages. So anybody that wants more information about me or my program, you will have this link in your message tabs as well. Okay, so make sure that you click that link to schedule a call if you're interested in taking this work deeper and really applying it to your life and having that epic romance that you all want. So that is about me. If anybody has any more questions, let me read the chat one second. For this session, this was a lot of info for me. Will I have access to this presentation again to digest? I focused on listening and would like to go back and read the notes. Absolutely, yeah. So what I'm going to do, because this is recorded, I will have a link for you to have that and watch it again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you this link here below the consult. This is schedule a call. This is join my email list. So if you join my email list, I will send you a link to the webinar so that you can watch it again and take notes and take it at your leisure. So make sure that you take advantage of that and do that. All right, so I want to make sure I can address any more questions before we have a few more minutes, so don't feel rushed to leave if you have something that you want to address. Anything that could have been clearer. I'm so happy to do this. You're very welcome. So the link is going to be in the chat. There's two. There's one for the call where you can have that hour session with me. And then there's one that says join my email list. And if you click on that, put your name and your email, and I will get you that replay of this entire thing. And that was for Lucy because she asked where the link is. It's in the chat if you have the ability to go to that. Just verify with me that you were able to see it and to find it, Lucy. I do have a blog. Thank you, Simone, for asking. I have a website where you have information to get in contact with me. That is Maria Levine, marialevinecoaching.com. So are you all able to get into the chat? And don't, let me put that into the chat as well. And if you aren't able to get it, like I said, I will be reaching out to each of you individually and giving you the links to this separately. So if you check your messages within the next few days, you will see me. I will be sending a message. And if you want this information, you will have it there as well. So if you're not able to get it by the end of this webinar, don't worry. You will have it in your meetup messages by latest Monday. All right. Thank you guys so much for coming. This was a pleasure. It was great meeting you all. I'm so happy to serve and to be here for you as a resource. If you need anything from me, just send me a message through Meetup and I will be there. So have a beautiful day and hopefully I'll see you at the next one.
Thank you. Enjoy the weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.